Welcome to the Miracosta Filmmakers podcast. Today we will be talking about the Black Mirror episode White Christmas.
I'm Beverly Balderrama.
I'm Jessica Ferguson.
What did we think about this
I
episode?
thought it was like the most confusing episode I've ever seen. I haven't seen that many episodes, so I don't know like what my standard is for Black Mirror, but this episode really fucked me up.
I think that's the perfect way to put it. It was so all over the place, but there's something about it, the fact that it was you didn't really know what direction it was taking you, that kind of intrigued me to it.
Yeah, and that's kind of something I want to touch on. It's separated into 3 acts, and of course it's separated into 3 acts like every story is, but the 3 acts were kind of like about something completely different. There's 3 separate stories about technology, and that's kind of what was confusing to me. It was all kind of connected at the end because the character Matt was like trying to break a confession, and that's the whole reason why they were in that cabin or whatever. But they told it in a way that there were just these 3 separate stories based around Christmas. That kind of confused me a bit.
Yeah, it was interesting delivery. So let's talk about the story a little bit. For anyone who hasn't seen the episodes, we have our 2 storytellers, Potter and Matt. Matt's John Hamm and Potter's played by Rafe Spall. And Matt definitely is driving the conversation. They're both locked in the cabin in the wilderness, and we don't really know why they're there. There's a lot of mystery behind it. It looks very low tech for a Black Mirror episode in the beginning, and then Matt starts to tell his story about why he's there. Now, him and Potter haven't really had a lot of conversation, and he even says that they have only spoke maybe 3 sentences over their entire course together, which has been quite a long while. So
yeah, wasn't it in the beginning that he had a hard time trying to get Potter to talk because Potter was like bottling all of this stuff up. Potter had this dark past and everything, and he didn't want to share everything. So throughout the show, Matt was able to get Potter to break that confession and like share everything that happened to him, even though he was very silent about it in the beginning.
Yeah, and Matt is obviously in control all the time and readily shares his information, although we find out he is lying at certain moments and withholds information as well. So Matt explains his past and his job to Potter. Now the reason that he is locked in this cabin is because he helped young men find dates by basically being in their minds and helping them through. He is helping a young man on his date when he witnesses a murder. And then because that's kind of how the murder was executed, I don't want to give away too much, he is then put away into this kind of world of being blocked and isolated.
Yeah, that whole first act with him helping that guy on that date just really fucked me up. Like I definitely liked the second and third act more because I found the beginning a little bit confusing. But something I do really want to point out about that beginning part was that I thought it was a bit metaphoric. Like there were kind of themes that I was picking up on that they were trying to tell. I mean, this is just kind of what I was interpreting, but I feel like a lot of what they were trying to say had to do with maybe anxiety, because what basically there was that guy who's on that date meeting that woman and everything, and there's basically this guy living in his head telling him everything to do. And we see that again with the character Greta when she's in that hospital bed, and then there's that woman that gives her a needle or whatever, and she's like, oh my god, she's so inexperienced or whatever she says. And I feel like that's kind of a little bit of a theme they were trying to tell, is that sometimes we just have these voices in our head that are telling us how we should act and behave.
And I think it's interesting that the woman who ends up murdering him is schizophrenic. And I thought that was a very interesting plot twist. So Matt is helping him on the date, and then they go home, and you think that they're going to have sex, and you think the problem is going to be that he's live streaming their sexual encounter, when in fact and the whole time you kind of are worried about the woman as if she's being preyed on by having all these people helping her date to like basically get in her pants. And then we find out that she's actually the predator and he's the victim.
Yeah, and I thought it was really fucked up when we saw all those men on that screen, like, watching the whole thing, and it seems like Black Mirror predicted Zoom.
You know what's so funny is I felt the same way. I think there's something that it did remind me of Zoom a lot.
Yeah.
And then, so they all witness the murder as well. They trash their hard drives. Matt's wife finds out, and that kind of is the curtain on the first act. And we go into Matt then explaining what he did for work. And he tells Potter, I bet you can't guess what I did for work, but I'm going to take you through my day, and you stop me when you think that you know what I do for a job. And we see this woman in a hospital bed. They're extracting something from her. She is fully conscious during this operation. We also see that the woman, Greta, is a very controlling person. She likes things a certain way. So after we see her being extracted and she's fully conscious during the operation, she wakes up in a little egg.
Which they call a cookie.
Which they call a cookie, which is
Which
also
I
very
don't, yeah, I don't understand that. What it looks like an egg, but they call it a cookie. It just makes no sense.
we're inside this cookie, right? And it is Matt's job to train this AI, making everything, cleaning everything, running, making the coffee, playing music to wake up Greta. And the AI Greta is a copy of Greta. And basically what Matt does is his company extracts these little tiny AIs and then teaches them how to do these things. So that's his job. And
Yeah, and it's in the little computer, code version of her just was not having it. She just did not want to do it. She's like, you can't make me do this. And so then he puts her in this thing that forces her through this boredom and isolation. And after she goes through that for like 6 months or whatever, she realizes she does want to work, because when you're sitting in absolute boredom and have nothing to do, you realize that having something to do is better than nothing. So that's what she goes through. And something I found insightful about that part was when he was talking with Potter about what he was doing. Potter was he found it, he thought it was wrong how he tortured her through that in that way, but then he points out but that it doesn't matter, because she's just a code. She has no feelings, she's just part of a computer. So yeah, I found that really interesting. So it's kind of like an argument on whether or not computers or AIs have the capacity to feel, and they don't.
And where do we draw the line at humanity? Is what Matt is doing torture? Is he torturing her, or is he just programming AI? Is it AI that should be afraid of the humans that are creating it? I think it did a really good job to highlight the difference between Matt and Porter, because When we're done with Greta's storyline, we go into Potter's backstory, which is he's in a relationship and he's very in love with this woman. She becomes pregnant. When he finds out, he's ecstatic and she's not as enthusiastic about it. They get into a fight and she blocks him. The person who blocked you cannot see you.
That's kind of a criticism that I have on this episode. I really did like the whole blocked idea. I just felt like there was kind of too much going on in this episode. Like the whole blocked thing could have been something that was used for a whole separate Black Mirror story. It was kind of something that was just crammed into this. There was all this other stuff going on, like the cookies, cabin story, and there was just a lot going on. The whole blocked thing, that was probably part of the episode I found the most fascinating, but I just really could see that being used as something that takes up an entire episode.
We're getting towards the end of the story, and Matt is blocked. He can't see his lover. Her name is Beth, played by Janet Montgomery. And she takes their child, and he's also blocked from the child. So he can't see the child. And he runs up to her in the street when she's pregnant. And he even gets a restraining order, or that world's version of it, placed on him. It's not till the end, when Beth eventually dies and the block dies with her, that we get to see the child and the reveal of it's not Potter's child, it's actually Tim's child. So, you know, there's kind of a lot going on in this episode.
Yeah, I really did like that third act the best. Just the whole thing about the child and the blocking, and when he found out that the child wasn't his, and then he like killed the grandfather with the snow globe and everything, and he left the child there. I thought that was a really good story, and I think it's a shame that they kind of saved that till just the very end, because that something like that could have made for an entire full-length episode.
I agree. And I think, I mean, I get it. I get the idea that it's a Christmas story and it's these two friends who are then kind of trading war stories. Honestly, could have taken any three of these storylines and seen a full episode created from them.
Yeah, and that's probably the main problem that I have with this episode, is just how it's the three-story thing, how it's not really a traditional story structure. And I guess I can see how that's something that maybe some people like about this episode, is how it's so different and so unique in that way. But I just found that kind of confusing to follow, that there was just something different happening each time. Every single time I was like invested in what was going on, it would change to something else. And then I had to get invested in the next story or whatever. I just didn't like how the interesting aspects of each story was cut so short, told in a really short and minuscule amount of time for this bigger story to connect to something larger.
Yeah, I would be interested to see what their writing process was.
Yeah, one of the ideas that he had, the first act, the one about the guy who meets the girl and everything, he got that idea based off of Bluetooth. Back in the day when Bluetooth first became a thing, and you would see someone walking down the street talking on it, you would think that person was like schizophrenic or something, because they're just like talking to themselves. So that's where he got that idea, to just kind of have this guy, he's just at this event and he's just talking to himself, but really he's talking to, someone through a speakerphone.
Wow, that's really interesting.
So which part of the story did you like the most? Like which of the three acts did you find the most interesting?
I actually really liked the entire episode. The thing I didn't like was the cabin. I hated that they were in the cabin. These little vignette stories. All three of them I found very appealing. I liked the fact that they were kind of short story arcs, because we got that payoff 3 times. So we would have in the first one that twist of her being the murderer. It almost was a horror movie. When you're seeing him screaming and dying, I thought that was like very emotional and extremely violent. In Greta's, it makes you really consider consciousness and the scariness of being stuck in a void. It also made me think about wealth and how we're living in a society where everything is just getting easier and easier. We just demand that things are done for us. At what cost? Is it really necessary to have someone make our toast perfectly, and our strive for perfection and having things done just right? And in the third story, I really loved Potter, and I think he was a very great character, and I don't often think that we see women in that position.
Yeah, it shows that women can be like just as awful as men.
It really does. And also manipulative and unforgiving. She was a very mean character, but then you see why she's doing it. And
Yeah, I don't know how I feel about Potter. You know, even though it was wrong what Beth did to him, you know, like I do understand why he did get, you know, like the punishment that he did. It's not right for a man to like be stalking a woman like that. He was kind of being obsessive over her. Um and so you know, he kept like spying on her every single Christmas. He was in the wrong too.
but I mean, she was just so final about everything. Like, you understand why Beth blocks him, because she knows that it's not his child. And she doesn't want to face the consequences of the infidelity. And instead of dealing with it, she blocks him. I think there's something to be said about how easy it was to block someone, in the same way that we talked about last week, how it's so easy to upvote and downvote someone without consequences, or out without just listening to them or anything like that, you know?
That's kind of the thing, just because of the whole three separate stories thing. I just kind of found it difficult to see what the whole theme was, what the overall message was that they were trying to get across in this episode. It's a lot easier to see that in the nosedive episode. When we were talking about that, we know that they're trying to talk about rating each other, but it's kind of hard to tell what the overall message of this episode is, because there's a lot, and I feel like each individual story has its own little themes to it.
It definitely felt like they were three separate messages. But the message of the full episode was a warning, and this is kind of with every Black Mirror episode, but a warning about the consequences of technology. In the first one, it's privacy. In the second one, it's consciousness and where is the line. And then the third one, and almost like the more that we get into technology, it kind of ruins our personal relationships.
Oh yeah, I definitely agree with that. The whole argument with technology and social media, does it really bring us closer, or does it bring us, or does it ruin relationships and make us further apart? It's more isolating to use social media. Better to stay away from it and to actually form real relationships where you actually communicate face to face.
Because think how differently that relationship would be if she wasn't allowed to block him. She'd have to face him and deal with the actions, and maybe he would have been fine raising Tim's child even. We don't know how that would play out, but because she was able to block him, I think it has a lot to do with, like we were talking about last week, cancel culture. You had said something about, does it actually bring us closer together, or does it distance us? And how do we use it?
It's so easy these days to just cut someone out of your life by just blocking them, and that's kind of ruining relationships.
And I get how it would maybe be beneficial to have that, like if you have a stalker or something, to be able to block them, or even,
Oh yeah.
yeah, it's nice to have an assistant. Like Greta's basically Siri. It's nice to have someone helping you. We think these things are going to be great, but at what cost?
Because sometimes we think that technology is going to help us and make everything so much better, but it really just has problems sometimes, and sometimes it creates problems and makes things worse.
Just because something can exist doesn't necessarily mean it should.
Yeah.
It was a dark episode. It's probably one of the scarier episodes that I've seen from Black Mirror. It was a really good episode. I give this one like a 9 out of 10 just because I agree with you that I think they could have made 3 really good separate episodes out of this.
Yeah.
Thanks. Well, thanks for listening. We'll see you guys next week.
All right, bye.
Bye. We record our podcast every Thursday at 4:30. You can find the Zoom link on our website, miracostafilmmaker.wixsite.com/film. Our Instagram is @miracostafilmmakers. Join us at our meetings every week,